What's up? Welcome to Tales Tomorrow. I am Morrow, your storyteller for today, and with me we have some more RPG horror stories. My back still hurts. My spine is in shambles. Actually, no, I'm kidding. I'm doing much better. I'm stuck in a seat without my VR because my back still hurts, but I still want to record some RPG horror stories and give myself a little bit of breathing room to work on stuff and just in general let my back heal. I probably could have taken a break from making some videos, but I really enjoy RPG horror stories. We have something really special here on Tales Tomorrow, and I just hate staying away, so we're just gonna go ahead and jump to the first RPG horror story for today. You won't date my character? Fine. I'll get the new player's character almost killed. Hi. Long-time reader, first-time poster. I've been sitting on the story for some time now, but I figured I'd toss it out there. This was a campaign that had more players, but the only ones that matter for this story is Druid, the problem player, Rogue, Paladin, and Barbarian, the almost victim. I'll start from the beginning. This was an in-person 5e campaign in a homebrew setting that I had worked on for over a year and was using the players to help flesh out the world further. The party had been playing for almost a year, and not many of the red flags that you'd be expecting were showing up at the table. A bit of clinginess here and there from Druid onto Paladin at the start, but it could easily be chalked up to Druid really only knowing Paladin. One player really needed to drop out for personal reasons, leaving an open space, and I and the party wanted to fill it. It wasn't long before Barbarian was invited to the next session, which worked out well in his story, as the party was coming to a major shopping town before beginning the next major arc of the story. Paladin and Rogue had gotten closer in game, and they were the ones who usually had each other's backs when they were in tight spaces or dealing with the consequences of their actions, like burning down a temple and dealing with that temple's god. Due to this, their characters had grown naturally together, which really started to agitate Druid. It wasn't clear to me until later in the story just how much it bothered them. Eventually, Paladin came to me about how they didn't like how Druid kept trying to force themselves into a romantic interest with them. I hadn't thought of anything of it in past campaigns. Paladin and Druid usually had intertwined characters. I told Paladin I'll talk to Druid and let him know to cut back the romantic stuff so we could all become comfortable at the table. After the conversation, it seemed like Druid understood and would cut back. But this wouldn't be much of a horror story if they did, right? At first, Druid seemed to be pulling back, but it only lasted for a couple of sessions. I'd gotten to the point of kicking Druid out of the game when Paladin and Rogue came to me with an idea to possibly fix the issue. After going over it with me, I accepted the plan, as it wouldn't cause any issues with the other players and would hopefully solve the situation without us having to find another player. The next session came, and with that, the start of the plan. The party had run into a Barbarian and were able to do some shopping and find an inn for the night, and the wagon they'd been traveling to had been parked out by the stables along with the horses. After the party had some drinks at the bar, they began to head to sleep, with Paladin and Rogue dipping out first. The party shared 2 bedrooms and began to notice that even though Paladin and Rogue had gone to bed first, neither of them were in their rooms. Worried the party members had been ambushed, the big battle of the campaign was Lolth, and they were having to deal with her assassins from time to time, and they had seen me messaging Rogue just a moment earlier. The party began investigating and eventually were able to find Paladin's and Rogue's footprints. The party found the footprints leading to the wagon that had the subtlest of movements just outside of town and slowly approached it. It sounds like it's leading up to like a cliche of like, oh no, you caught us with our pants down, and one player inside of the other player. Why? Is that part of the plan? Or they're gonna try to subvert expectations, be like, we were under the covers banging, we were under the covers looking at glowing at our dinosaurs. Have you ever seen that? Have you ever heard of that meme before? Anyway, let's see how this plays out. As the party were about to pull open the back door of the wagon, I only had one last message to send to Paladin and Rogue, who was on top. They agreed that Paladin was on top. As the party flung open the doors, I described how the barrels and crates on the wagon tasted the cover Paladin and Rogue, with Paladin's head and shoulders visible vertically and Rogue's head and shoulders visible horizontally. Both Paladin and Rogue do the cottony act-reaction where they scramble for their clothes to cover up. Everyone at the table, well, almost everyone, was dying laughing, with Barbarian messing with them by taking a hold of the lead of the wagon and, with a successful athletics check, began pulling them around, keeping them from properly being able to get dressed. It was at this point where Druid, in what can only be described as a child's hissy fit, got up from the table, hurriedly walked into the other room. We decided to call it a night after that, and I talked with Druid to make sure they were okay. They said they were, and that it was something else I had gotten up for. It was obvious that it wasn't, but I didn't want to push them on and left at that. Is that what the plan was? Just like roleplay getting caught with your pants down? Is that supposed to help anything? Hold on a second. If the DM was planning of kicking Druid anyway because they're causing such a commotion at the table and it was becoming such a problem, I'm just kind of confused. What is this plan supposed to accomplish? I just don't understand. I mean, if it was a plan to try to keep Druid from being kicked out, what is the plan here? You know, I'm thoroughly confused. Maybe it just doesn't make sense to me. I don't know. But I guess we're gonna see, I suppose, right? I think we're gonna see, maybe. A few days before the next mission, I checked with Druid to see if they're okay with coming back to the table, and they promised they're okay. The following session is what really showed that no, Druid was in fact not ready to come back to the table. The next session picked up in the morning after, with the party headed to the pub for breakfast before heading out for that day to get in some Bitcoin shopping. The party ordered the usual, with Druid ordering something really sweet and messy, where they described that in their depression, they faceplant into the food. After everyone ate and got up for the day, the party split up into the duos to handle their shopping, with Druid and Barbarian teaming up. Druid and Barbarian's big task was to try to get into the Merchants Guild, using Druid's noble background and dress, which would give them a possible way to cross a massive desert with a caravan. Barbarian was going to act like they were Druid's bodyguard, so the guard would let them go in with the Druid. The problem began when after Barbarian just gets done doing a 14 charisma check, Druid decides that this is the time to mention that even though they had changed in their traveling clothes, they didn't clean off the mess from breakfast. This made it harder for Barbarian to backtrack and convince the guards to let them in, causing the guards to take a closer look at Barbarian. Barbarian was one in man in the background, but not a well-known one. But with Druid constantly fighting against everything Barbarian would say, it made the guard get suspicious. And before Barbarian could get Druid to walk away with them, the head guard had him stop with another flanking them. The head guard, beginning to notice the nervousness of Barbarian and the constant arguing of Druid, looked in the bingo book of wanted criminals to see if either were on it. Barbarian in his backstory had unknowingly killed his mercenary group and had been on the run ever since. With the guard noticing the drawing of Barbarian, he called the city guard and not wanting to make the situation worse, Barbarian didn't fight back and Druid has just gone catatonic. After being booked into local jail, Barbarian and Druid found they were being sentenced to death by hanging for Barbarian's crime. Druid was considered an accomplice as they refused to say anything in their defense. Barbarian was trying to encourage Druid to, at the very least, save themselves by telling the truth of them just meeting Barbarian yesterday and having nothing to do with the killings, so they could inform the party and potentially jailbreak Barbarian. Okay, so just to reiterate what's going on here, from what I'm understanding is Druid's character, or I guess maybe the Druid is the player, they either like Paladin's character or maybe they like Paladin, but their character saw the Paladin character basically banging Rogue. And now they're role-playing this depressive thing. They're role-playing the character just kind of being mopey and depressed and not really taking care of themselves and just kind of causing a tiny bit of a kerfuffle. Basically not sure what's going on. Is Druid supposed to do something explosive that like gets them in trouble? Eventually the party meet back up and rendezvous point and would notice the Barbarian and Druid were missing. The party then had spent the next part of the session trying to find Barbarian and Druid, with them eventually finding them at the gallows with their hands and legs bound, surrounded by 6 town guards, 2 high-ranking guards, and the captain of the guard who was a spellcaster. The party began combat to save their friends, with Paladin and another player being almost killed and the party barely being able to escape the town, completely locking them out of any purchases they were wanting to make, as they were going to discuss splitting the gold up from their collective gold to make payments. Barbarian and Druid had to leave all the belongings that they had on their person when they were arrested behind, leaving them unarmed when the party had to travel across a deadly desert to escape the guards' chase. Luckily, the party had some spare weapons that could give them, so better in a fight if needed. I gave them a traveling merchant to help them out a bit with the missing gear, and the party was perfectly okay with sparing the gold to help them. Was there a big explosive argument at the table? Did the players all turn on Druid? Did the campaign fall apart? I can happily say that I had some really good players and none of the above happened. Might be a bit anticlimactic, but Druid left the campaign after that and were able to bring in another player to replace them, eventually killing Loth and finishing the campaign with a satisfying ending for each player. Edit. I admit it wasn't the most mature option allowing Paladin and Rogue to go through with the plan, but I almost wanted it to be a sharp wake-up call. I did also talk with everyone afterwards, and since no death happened, they didn't want to retcon anything and allow it to roll on. That's why I gave them the merchant as some kind of softener. Okay, so I had to reread the story just in case, because I had such a difficult time to understand like how much of a problem the Druid was here. The only thing I understood is that Druid kind of had feelings for Paladin's character and don't think that they could get together. Do you really need to kick Druid out if that is the only issue going on. I mean, if Druid is making such a major disruption at the table, right? And they really want their headcanon of their character and the Paladin's character to get together, and they will do anything possible in order to make that happen, including becoming a disruption, yeah, I could see how that becomes a problem. You ask them to knock it off, and then if they keep going, tell them to knock it off, and eventually you have to boot the problem player. If Druid was doing that specifically, then I can completely understand why you'd want to remove the Druid. And it seems like you wanted to ask the Druid to leave because they're becoming such an issue. My problem is you decided to then listen to what Rogue and Paladin had planned out, which was like I guess a stunt. That's the best way to really describe it. It was basically a stunt, and you agreed because in your story you said you wanted to give them a sharp wake-up call. You know how you can give somebody a wake-up call? Just turn to them as a player, right, from DM to player, and ask them, hey, knock it off. If this continues, I'll have to ask you to step out from the game. That is the sharpest wake-up call that you can ever give to a player directly, period. You don't have to do anything in-game, don't have to pull some weird, silly stunt. You just have to let them know directly that you are not interested in dealing with this further, and this is becoming a problem, so therefore, unless you knock it off, you're going to be removed from the game. Which I think is it's a very reasonable thing to ask a player to do, especially if they're causing some sort of a major disturbance for your game and creating a situation where it makes other players feel uncomfortable. But you decided to do the stunt, which I don't know why you did. It's one thing to say, hey, stop trying to force a romance and making Paladin player uncomfortable, and it's a whole other thing to be like, surprise, you caught him banging. What are we supposed to hear? Like sitcom, like sound effects of like laughter and like people cheering and stuff? Is it supposed to be like a sitcom bit or something like that? I don't know. I'm not fully sure what the intention was for y'all to try to do that, but it almost feels like it was done a little bit maliciously to kind of make fun of the Druid. I don't want to be on Druid's side because I don't know how bad they are, but from the story as I've explained here, as put into words here, it was just like, yeah, I don't know. You could have just avoided the whole event by just asking the Druid ahead of time, just knock it off. I'm gonna have to ask you to step out. I feel like this is one of those simple situations that sort of became more complex for the sake of it, you know? A player got pissed off because an NPC introduced was married to a guy. I've started D&D with a new group of Discord. 2 of them were new players and 2 were old players from previous game. The player important to the story, Sarah, was a new player I had not played with before. I sent them all a short rule list, and one of the rules was there won't be any romance with any NPCs, because I wasn't comfortable playing that. If they had a spouse, etc. in a backstory, that was fine, but no romance with NPCs. Sarah tried to argue on this rule a lot, mentioning previous game where she had a romance, and also online shows that had romances. I told her I wasn't comfortable with that, and she stopped asking. They all made the characters. In the 3rd session, they came across one of the early BBEGs I had made for the game, a Wendigo-like monster who haunted the mountains. The party was saved by a group of hunters from a local tribe, and the monster escaped. Sarah in particular really liked the leader of the hunters, who was a woman. From my description, she made an artwork for her as well. Wait, hold on. Sarah drew your character from just the description? Granted, we know the title of this story. This is almost like an uh-oh, things about to get really bad because now Sarah is super invested in this NPC to the point where she even drew art of her. I mean, that's really cool of your player to do so, honestly. I think players that draw stuff like that for their like D&D groups and stuff just for fun is awesome. It's amazing. Anyway, I'm impressed that Sarah did that, but I don't think she's gonna be super happy because of the title of the story. In the next session, the hunters took them back to their tribe where they met the chief, who had made it his mission to hunt the monster in the mountains. They also found that the hunter woman Sarah had drawn was the wife of the chief. Sarah got really upset at this. She told me that this wasn't cool, and that I'd only decided to make them husband and wife because she had shown interest in the woman. Okay, I think Sarah's kind of jumping the gun here a little bit, but let's see what happens. I told her this didn't make any sense, and she started saying how she wanted to romance the hunter, and I reminded her about my rule, which she had agreed to. She started arguing again and said that this rule was homophobic. How is this rule homophobic? This is a really bad faith argument. How is this rule homophobic if nobody can romance any NPC? Nobody that is straight, nobody that is gay, basically nobody can have a chance with anything. Maybe Sarah's into this one NPC, but the DM said that everybody, He didn't say any sort of clause like only the gays can't romance somebody. He said everybody can't romance because the DM is just not interested in running some sort of a romance. DMs are creating the world and they're creating NPCs, and they're fully in right to make NPCs that are married to whoever the DM wants them to be married to. They could be hetero couples and homosexual couples, but it's up to the DM to decide that. Maybe there's a grand reason why the characters are married. Maybe it's just on a whim. Maybe he just made the characters willy-nilly and just kind of gave them basic characteristics and relationship links, so just without really much of a second thought, and just that's the world that it is. But to call it homophobic, this kind of doesn't make sense because nobody can romance. I asked her to explain, and she started saying how I could have made the chief a woman, so the hunter was married to a woman. I told her that she wasn't making sense. She shouldn't call me homophobic for no reason. I also told her that I had thought of these two from the start, and the chief in particular was supposed to be a major NPC in the start. She said she didn't believe it, and that I'd only done this because I didn't want Sarah's female PC flirting with a female NPC. The other players also argued with her. She kept arguing back with everyone until everyone got pissed. She started crying and left the group. Ah, I see. Right. So because the world doesn't fit Sarah's headcanon for how things should be, that means the DM is being homophobic in some way, which makes no sense at all. As a DM, you're fully allowed to make the NPCs, the worlds, locations, all parts of your actual world in any way you want. And the DM just made the chief and the woman character married. That's it. That's really it. The whole plan was to make the chief an important character, and they already created the character as they are. But there's nothing wrong with the chief being a male, just like there wouldn't be any sort of problem with the chief being a female. The DM just chose for the chief to be as they are and chose that they'll be married to another NPC. And that's it. Sarah's headcanon is in conflict with the DM's actual world. But to Sarah, the most important thing is her headcanon and who she can romance, even though the DM said he's not going to be putting in any sort of romance with players and NPCs together. So her turn this into a problem really doesn't make sense. Nobody can romance anyone. If you wanted to romance somebody, join a different game. Don't play the game where the DM says, I'm not having any romances of PCs and NPCs. If the DM already tells you from the very, very beginning that there are no chance to romance anybody, period, then why are you staying in the game, Sarah? It's Sarah's fault for choosing to read that rule and saying, nah, I'm gonna stick around and try to romance NPCs anyway, even though the DM says he's not comfortable with that sort of thing. Sarah, all you had to do is just join a different game that is fully allowing you to romance whoever you want. You chose to stay in this game, girl. Why are you doing this? Sarah saw the no romancing NPCs rule and turned it into a challenge. She was like, I bet you I could still find a way. I bet you could find an exploit, a speed run, or some sort of a game-breaking glitch to try to romance somebody anyway. If you want to romance NPCs, don't join games where the DM is not comfortable with you romancing NPCs. Simple as that. And with that, that's going to be all our stories for today. I want to thank you very much for watching, and thanks so much for being here. If you like what I do, consider subscribing to the channel and leaving a like. Also, if the RPG Horror Stories ever goes down, or if you want to submit your own personalized horror story, email is down in the description below. I'll see you again in more Tales tomorrow. Bye-bye.